In a small town in Massachusetts, a story of unwavering loyalty and shocking injustice is about to unfold. Former Detective Michael James sits in his prison cell, wrongfully convicted of a crime he didn't commit, but his faithful canine partner, Shadow, refuses to give up on him. What this remarkable German Shepherd discovers will shake the foundations of the justice system and leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew. Dear viewers, prepare yourselves for a story that will touch your hearts and remind you that true loyalty knows no bounds. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible journey of faith, justice, and redemption. The crisp autumn air of Salem, Massachusetts, carried the scent of fallen leaves as Detective Michael James and his K9 partner Shadow patrolled the quiet streets of their beloved community. At 45, Michael had spent the last 15 years building an impeccable reputation within the Salem Police Department, with the last 5 alongside his faithful companion Shadow. "Another quiet night, boy," Michael said, reaching down to scratch behind Shadow's ears. The German Shepherd's alert eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, a habit that had helped them crack numerous cases over the years. That October evening in 2023 seemed like any other until dispatch crackled over the radio. "All units, we have a 187 at 1242 Maple Street. Suspect possibly still on scene." Michael's heart rate quickened as he responded, Detective James and Shadow responding. He'd investigated countless homicides before, but something about this call felt different. The address was in one of Salem's most affluent neighborhoods, home to several prominent city officials. As they pulled up to the Victorian mansion, Shadow's demeanor changed dramatically. The dog's ears perked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat. "What is it, boy?" Michael whispered, drawing his weapon. Shadow's instincts had never steered them wrong. Inside, they found District Attorney Thomas Harrison dead in his study, a single gunshot wound to his chest. The room had been ransacked, papers scattered everywhere. But it was what Shadow did next that would haunt Michael forever. The dog began pawing frantically at a specific section of the hardwood floor, whining urgently. Michael had learned to trust these signals, but before he could investigate, backup arrived. Among them was Internal Affairs investigator Sarah Maxwell, someone Michael had clashed with numerous times over her aggressive pursuit of dirty cops. "Step away from the scene, James," Maxwell ordered, her voice cold. "We'll take it from here." "Shadow's found something," Michael protested, but Maxwell was already calling for uniformed officers to remove him from the room. As they led him away, Shadow's distressed barks echoed through the mansion. That night marked the beginning of Michael's nightmare. Within 24 hours, evidence began surfacing that seemed to implicate him in Harrison's murder. A large sum of money appeared in his offshore account. Security footage showed someone of his build entering Harrison's home. His fingerprints were found on the murder weapon discovered in a nearby dumpster. The evidence mounted quickly. Too quickly, Michael would later realize. But by then, it was too late. Despite Shadow's continued agitation whenever they returned to the crime scene, despite the dog's desperate attempts to draw attention to that specific spot in Harrison's study, Michael found himself arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial was a media sensation. Decorated detective charged in DA's murder dominated headlines across New England. Michael's defense team argued that he was being framed, but the prosecution painted a compelling picture of a corrupt cop who had killed Harrison to prevent the exposure of his illegal activities. Throughout it all, Shadow remained at the courthouse, refusing to leave even when animal control tried to remove him. The dog's loyalty became a minor media sensation of its own, with local news stations running stories about the K9 who wouldn't abandon his partner. The jury took only 6 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, Shadow's heartbreaking howls filled the courthouse. The last thing Michael saw before being escorted to prison transport was his faithful partner being restrained by officers as he struggled to reach his human companion. "I'll find a way to prove my innocence, boy," Michael whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I promise." What no one knew then was that Shadow had indeed discovered something crucial that night in Harrison's study. The truth lay hidden beneath those floorboards, waiting to be revealed. And Shadow, with the unwavering loyalty that only a dog could possess, would not rest until he made someone understand what he had found. As Michael settled into his first night in Massachusetts State Prison, Shadow was being transferred to a K9 retirement facility. But fate had other plans for this extraordinary pair, and their story was far from over. The evidence that would ultimately exonerate Michael was already in motion, guided by the determined spirit of a dog who knew the truth about that fateful night. Lisa Chen had always been different from the other K9 handlers at Salem's police training center. At 58, she was supposed to be planning her retirement, not taking on new challenges. But when Shadow arrived at the facility, his spirit broken and his eyes filled with a sadness she'd never seen in a police dog, she knew she had to help. "There's something special about this one," she told her supervisor, watching Shadow refuse his food for the third day straight. The dog spent hours staring out the facility's gates, as if waiting for someone who would never come. Lisa had known Michael James professionally for years, and like many in the department, she struggled to believe he was capable of murder. But it wasn't until she started working with Shadow that she began to suspect something far more sinister was at play. It happened during a routine training exercise. While practicing search patterns in an abandoned warehouse, Shadow suddenly broke protocol. He began scratching at the floor in the same distinct pattern Lisa had read about in his final case report, the behavior he'd exhibited in Harrison's study. "Show me, boy," she whispered, her heart racing. "Show me what you found that night." Shadow led her to different areas of the warehouse, consistently demonstrating the same behavior when he encountered certain types of hardwood flooring. Lisa's mind raced back to her years of experience. K9s were trained to indicate differently for various discoveries: drugs, explosives, bodies. But this was something else entirely. That evening, she made a crucial decision. Using her retirement savings, she hired Marcus Rodriguez, a private investigator known for his work on wrongful conviction cases. "I need you to look into something," she told him, her voice trembling with urgency, "and we need to do it quietly." Meanwhile, Michael was facing his own battles within the prison walls. His former status as a police officer made him a marked man. Every day brought new threats, new challenges to his survival. His only solace came in the form of letters from his elderly mother, Margaret, who had sold her house to help fund his appeal. "I know, my son," she had declared at his sentencing, her voice carrying the weight of her 70 years. And the Michael I raised would never take a life in cold blood. As autumn turned to winter, Lisa and Marcus began piecing together troubling inconsistencies in the case. The security footage showing someone of Michael's build had gaps, precisely 4 seconds missing at crucial moments. The offshore account had been created using an IP address that traced back to a coffee shop where internal affairs investigator Sarah Maxwell was known to work on her laptop. But it was Shadow's continued behavior that provided the breakthrough they needed. During a training exercise near Harrison's now vacant house, the dog broke away, racing through the overgrown garden to a storm drain at the property's edge. Inside, wrapped in waterproof material, they found a thumb drive. The drive was password protected, its contents a mystery, but Shadow's discovery proved one thing. He had been trying to tell them something that night in the study. The floorboards he'd been so interested in might have held similar evidence that had since disappeared. "We need to get back into that house," Marcus said, reviewing his notes. Whatever Shadow found that night, someone went to great lengths to hide it. Lisa stroked Shadow's fur, noting how the dog's eyes seemed more alive now that they were actively investigating. "We'll need help," she replied. "Someone on the inside who can access the evidence logs from the original investigation. That help would come from an unexpected source." Officer Jenny Martinez, a rookie who had been on scene the night of Harrison's murder, reached out to Lisa after witnessing something that had been haunting her for months. "The night of the murder," Jenny confided, her voice barely above a whisper as they met in a quiet diner. "I saw Investigator Maxwell return to the scene alone. She spent almost an hour in the study. When she left, she was carrying a small package. It wasn't logged into evidence." As they talked, Shadow lay quietly under the table, but his ears were perked, alert. He knew, in that way that dogs sometimes do, that the humans were finally starting to understand what he had known all along. Back in his cell, Michael received a cryptic message from his court-appointed therapist. "Keep your head down. Friends are working." For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope, but Sarah Maxwell wasn't finished. As Lisa and Marcus got closer to the truth, strange accidents began to occur. Lisa's car brakes failed on a steep hill. Marcus found his office ransacked. And most disturbing of all, someone broke into the K9 facility late one night, heading straight for Shadow's kennel. They hadn't counted on the old security guard, Vietnam veteran Frank Wilson, who had taken a particular liking to Shadow. The would-be intruder fled, but not before Frank caught a glimpse of a familiar face, one that would blow the investigation wide open. As snow began to fall over Salem, Lisa, Marcus, and their growing team of allies raced to uncover the truth before it was too late. Shadow's unusual behavior had started them on this path, but what they would discover would shake the Salem Police Department to its core. The visiting room at Massachusetts State Prison fell silent as Shadow padded through the door, his nails clicking against the concrete floor. Michael James, now noticeably thinner after 6 months behind bars, felt his heart stop at the sight of his former partner. Lisa Chen had pulled every string she could to arrange this visit, knowing that both man and dog needed it desperately. "Shadow," Michael whispered, his voice breaking. The German shepherd crossed the room in 3 bounds, pressing himself against the bars that separated them. Michael reached through, burying his fingers in the familiar fur. For a moment, neither moved, partner reunited with partner, each drawing strength from the other's presence. Lisa watched the reunion through tears, noting how Shadow's entire demeanor had transformed. Gone was the dejected, depressed dog from the training facility. In his place stood the alert, confident K-9 officer she'd heard so much about. "He's been trying to tell us something, Michael," Lisa explained, her voice tight with emotion. "Something about that night, about the floorboards in Harrison's study." Michael's eyes widened as memories flooded back. The scratching pattern. It wasn't his usual alert. It was different, almost like he trailed off, lost in thought. Like he was trying to show us something specific. Lisa finished. "We found a thumb drive, Michael, in a storm drain near Harrison's house. Shadow led us to it." The implications of this discovery hung heavy in the air. Before they could discuss it further, a guard announced their time was up. As they led Michael away, Shadow's whimper echoed through the room, a sound that would haunt Lisa for days to come. Meanwhile, Marcus Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered disturbing connections. The murder weapon that had been found with Michael's fingerprints showed microscopic signs of tampering. The prints were too perfect, as if they'd been transferred. More troublingly, he discovered that D.A. Harrison had been investigating a series of suspicious police shootings just before his death. "The rabbit hole goes deeper than we thought," Marcus told Lisa over a secure line. Harrison was building a case against someone high up in the department, someone who had the power to make evidence disappear. Their breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Frank Wilson, the security guard who had thwarted the attempt to reach Shadow, finally recognized where he'd seen the intruder before. It was in an old photograph taken at the police academy 20 years ago. Sarah Maxwell stood in the back row, her arm around a young Thomas Harrison. They were more than colleagues, Frank revealed, his weathered hands trembling as he handed Lisa the photo. They were family. Harrison was Maxwell's uncle. The pieces began falling into place. Harrison had discovered something about his niece, something worth killing for. But before Lisa and Marcus could act on this information, tragedy struck. Michael's mother, Margaret, who had been tirelessly advocating for her son's release, suffered a severe stroke. As she lay in the hospital, barely conscious, her only words were a plea to see her son one last time. The request for a compassionate visit set off a chain of events that would change everything. Sarah Maxwell, perhaps sensing the walls closing in, made her move. She personally objected to the visit, citing security concerns. But her aggressive opposition caught the attention of Judge Eleanor Thompson, who had presided over Michael's original trial. "Something doesn't add up," the judge confided to her clerk. "Why would an internal affairs investigator be so invested in a routine compassionate visit?" Shadow, meanwhile, had begun exhibiting the same urgent scratching behavior during training exercises near the courthouse. Lisa, now attuned to the dog's signals, followed his lead. In the courthouse archives, in a box of evidence from Michael's trial, Shadow's behavior became frantic. "The floor," Lisa breathed, watching Shadow's familiar pattern. "He's not trying to show us what's under the floorboards. He's trying to tell us about something hidden underneath all the evidence, something we've been looking at wrong this entire time." As a winter storm raged outside, Lisa, Marcus, and their growing team of allies raced to piece together the truth. They had no way of knowing that in his prison cell, Michael was receiving a visitor, someone who had finally decided to break their silence about what really happened the night Thomas Harrison died. The storm that battered Salem that night seemed to echo the turmoil of their investigation. But as Shadow had proven time and again, the truth has a way of coming to light, even in the darkest of times. And for Michael James, that light was about to break through in the most unexpected way. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Michael James as 4 armed guards escorted him to his mother's room. The compassionate visit, finally granted after Judge Thompson's intervention, felt like both a blessing and a curse. Margaret James lay still against stark white sheets, medical equipment beeping softly around her fragile form. "Mom," Michael whispered, his shackled hands gentle as they covered hers. "I'm here." Margaret's eyes fluttered open, tears streaming down her weathered face. "My boy," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "Shadow, he knows. He always knew." Before Michael could ask what she meant, his mother's grip tightened with surprising strength. "The garden, Harrison's garden. I volunteered there, every Sunday. Until that night, when I saw—" Her voice trailed off as fatigue overtook her, but her words had ignited a fire in Michael's mind. His mother had been there. She had seen something the night of Harrison's murder, something she'd been too afraid to reveal. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Lisa Chen and Shadow were making their own breakthrough. The dog's persistent scratching at the evidence boxes had led them to discover something extraordinary: a false bottom in Harrison's desk drawer, carefully documented in crime scene photos but never investigated. "Look at this." Marcus Rodriguez pointed to a detail in the photograph: the angle of Shadow's paw marks on the study floor. He wasn't indicating the floorboards themselves. He was mimicking the same diagonal pattern as this hidden compartment. Lisa's hands trembled as she examined Shadow's training logs from the weeks before Harrison's murder. He and Michael were working on a new alert pattern, she realized, for hidden compartments and furniture. Shadow wasn't just finding evidence that night. He was telling us where to look, as snow continued to fall outside. Jenny Martinez made a discovery that would change everything. Reviewing old security footage from the evidence room, she noticed something odd about Sarah Maxwell's behavior the night she'd returned to the crime scene. The internal affairs investigator had been wearing gloves, but not standard police issue. They were specialized gloves, the kind used to handle documents without leaving prints. She wasn't removing evidence, Jenny realized with stunning clarity. She was planting it. The truth began to unfold like a complex origami, each fold revealing new layers of deception. Harrison's investigation into police shootings hadn't been targeting corrupt officers. It had been focusing on a pattern of evidence tampering that spanned decades. Sarah Maxwell, his own niece, had been systematically destroying evidence that could have exonerated countless innocent people. Shadow's behavior took on new meaning as Lisa and Marcus pieced together the timeline. The dog hadn't just found evidence of Harrison's murder. He'd uncovered a pattern that pointed to years of corruption. His scratching wasn't random. It was a desperate attempt to communicate a message that only Michael, his partner, would have understood. In his hospital visit with his mother, Michael learned the final piece of the puzzle. Margaret, while tending to Harrison's prized roses, had witnessed a confrontation between uncle and niece the night of the murder. She'd seen Sarah Maxwell emerge from the house, her hands shaking, something clutched against her chest. But fear and confusion had kept Margaret silent. Until now. "I couldn't let you suffer anymore," Margaret whispered, her strength fading. "Shadow." He tried to tell everyone. Such a good boy. Such a loyal friend. As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted in the hospital corridor. Lisa Chen's voice rang out, urgent and clear. "You need to see this now." She burst into the room, Shadow at her heels, holding a tablet displaying security footage from the night of Harrison's murder. The footage hadn't come from the house. It had come from a neighbor's doorbell camera overlooked in the initial investigation. And there, clear as day, it showed Sarah Maxwell entering Harrison's house through the back door, her face twisted with determination, nearly 2 hours before Michael had arrived on scene. But it was what Shadow did next that left everyone in the room speechless. The German Shepherd padded to Margaret's bedside, gently laying his head on her hand, his eyes full of understanding. In that moment, the bond between human and canine transcended all barriers, of species, of justice, of truth itself. "All this time," Michael breathed, watching his partner comfort his mother. "You were trying to tell us where to look. You never gave up." As monitors beeped and snow fell outside the hospital windows, a plan began to form. With Margaret's testimony, the new security footage, and the evidence of Maxwell's tampering, they finally had a chance to right a terrible wrong. But Sarah Maxwell wouldn't go down without a fight, and her next move would put everyone they loved in danger. Snow blanketed Salem in pristine white as Sarah Maxwell stormed into Police Chief Wilson's office, her carefully maintained composure cracking. Behind her cold eyes, desperation lurked like a cornered animal. "There's been a security breach," she announced, her voice tight. "The James case evidence has been compromised." What she didn't know was that Chief Wilson had spent the previous night reviewing the evidence Lisa Chen and Marcus Rodriguez had uncovered. The old photo of Maxwell with her uncle, the specialized gloves, the doorbell camera footage, each piece fitting together like a grim puzzle. "Sit down, Sarah," he said quietly, his 30 years of service weighing heavily in his voice. "We need to talk about Thomas Harrison." Meanwhile, at Salem General Hospital, Margaret James's condition had stabilized. Shadow hadn't left her side, maintaining his vigil with unwavering dedication. The dog's presence seemed to give her strength, and her testimony was growing stronger, clearer with each passing hour. "I remember everything now," she told Lisa, her aged hands stroking Shadow's fur. "That night I saw Sarah arguing with Thomas in his study. She was waving papers at him, evidence files. He was threatening to expose her, said he couldn't protect her anymore, not after what she'd done." In the hospital corridor, Michael paced in his shackles, protected by Frank Wilson and 2 trusted officers. The former detective's mind raced, connecting dots that had eluded him for months. The shootings Harrison was investigating, they weren't random. Maxwell was protecting someone powerful enough to keep her untouchable all these years. Jenny Martinez burst into the hospital wing, clutching her laptop. "You need to see this," she gasped. She'd been digging through archived case files, looking for patterns in Maxwell's evidence tampering. What she found was staggering. Every case she interfered with, every piece of evidence she planted or destroyed, they all lead back to one person. The former police commissioner, Robert Drake. Drake had retired 5 years ago, moving to Florida with a spotless reputation and a generous pension. But his legacy was built on lies, carefully maintained by his protege, Sarah Maxwell. Harrison had discovered the truth, and it had cost him his life. As this revelation spread through their small team, Shadow suddenly tensed. His ears pricked forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Seconds later, the hospital's power went out, plunging the corridors into darkness. "Nobody moves," Frank Wilson commanded, his military training taking over. But Shadow was already in motion, positioning himself between Margaret's bed and the door. In the dim emergency lighting, his eyes glowed with fierce determination. The attack came swiftly. 3 men in tactical gear, moving with professional precision. But they hadn't counted on Shadow. The German Shepherd launched himself at the first intruder with devastating accuracy, his police training evident in every movement. The corridor erupted into chaos as Frank and the officers engaged the other attackers. Michael, despite his shackles, managed to position himself between the attackers and his mother's room. "You're not touching her," he growled, every inch the decorated detective he'd once been. The fight was brief but violent. When it ended, all 3 attackers were subdued, and one of them was talking. They worked for Drake. The former commissioner had ordered them to silence Margaret James before she could testify. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. During the fight, Shadow had torn off one attacker's tactical vest. Hidden in an inner pocket was a thumb drive, the twin to the one they'd found in the storm drain. Together, they contained Drake and Maxwell's entire operation. Every falsified report, every planted piece of evidence, every innocent person they'd framed to protect their corruption. As dawn broke over Salem, Sarah Maxwell was taken into custody at the police station. But not before she made one final, desperate confession. "You don't understand," she told Chief Wilson, her facade finally cracking. Uncle Thomas was going to ruin everything. 20 years of keeping order, of controlling the narrative. He was going to destroy it all for his precious conscience. The evidence was irrefutable. The thumb drives, Margaret's testimony, the doorbell camera footage, and most importantly, Shadow's persistent signals about the hidden compartment in Harrison's study, where they finally found Harrison's detailed records of Maxwell and Drake's crimes. Michael James stood in his mother's hospital room, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered city in shades of gold. Shadow pressed against his leg, their bond unbroken by months of separation. Lisa, Marcus, Jenny, and Frank gathered around them, a team united by their pursuit of truth. "All those months," Michael said softly, kneeling to embrace his faithful partner. "You never stopped trying to tell them. You never gave up on me." Shadow's tail wagged as he licked Michael's face. His mission finally accomplished. The truth was out, justice would be served, and most importantly, his human was coming home. Spring blossoms drifted on the breeze outside Salem's courthouse as Michael James adjusted his tie, his hands steady for the first time in months. Shadow sat perfectly positioned beside him, their reflection in the polished marble showing handler and K9 reunited, ready to face whatever came next. Inside the packed courtroom, Judge Eleanor Thompson presided over a hearing that would expose decades of corruption. Margaret James sat in the front row, her strength returning day by day, supported by Lisa Chen on one side and Frank Wilson on the other. Behind them, rows of faces told stories of lives touched by Maxwell and Drake's corruption. Officers framed, civilians wrongly convicted, families torn apart. Sarah Maxwell and Robert Drake sat at the defendant's table, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The thumb drives, Margaret's testimony, and most damning of all, Harrison's own detailed records of their crimes, found exactly where Shadow had tried to indicate that fateful night. As Michael took the stand, Shadow's eyes never left his partner. The German Shepherd's unwavering loyalty had become legendary within the department, a symbol of everything true and right about the bond between Handler and K9. Shadow didn't just find evidence, Michael testified, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed courtroom. He showed us what real loyalty looks like. When everyone else believed the lies, he knew the truth, and he never stopped trying to tell it. The proceedings revealed the full scope of Maxwell and Drake's operation. For 20 years, they had manipulated evidence, framed innocent officers, and protected corrupt officials, all under the guise of internal affairs investigations. Thomas Harrison had discovered the truth and paid with his life, but his sacrifice and Shadow's determination had finally brought everything to light. Jenny Martinez presented the technical evidence, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. Marcus Rodriguez detailed the pattern of corruption, his investigative skills vindicated, but it was Lisa Chen's testimony about Shadow's behavior that moved many to tears. "I've trained K9s for 25 years, she said, watching Shadow's alert posture beside Michael. "But I've never seen dedication like this. Shadow didn't just solve a crime, he showed us what justice really means. It's not about power or control, it's about standing by the truth, no matter the cost." The verdict was unanimous. Sarah Maxwell and Robert Drake were convicted on multiple counts, including murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. But more importantly, dozens of wrongful convictions would be overturned. Lives restored, families reunited. As spring turned to summer, changes swept through the Salem Police Department. Michael James was not only exonerated but promoted to head a new integrity unit, with Shadow by his side. Lisa Chen delayed her retirement to help train a new generation of K9 handlers, emphasizing the deep bond between human and K9 partners. Margaret James recovered fully, her garden becoming a gathering place for those working to reform the department. Jenny Martinez was promoted to detective, her dedication to truth setting an example for other young officers. Frank Wilson continued his security work, now with a K9 partner of his own, one of Shadow's pups from a recent litter. On a warm June evening, Michael and Shadow patrolled their old beat, the setting sun painting the streets in shades of gold. They passed Harrison's old house, now transformed into a community center for police community relations. Shadow paused, looking up at his partner with eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world. "You never gave up on me, boy," Michael said softly, kneeling beside his faithful friend. "You showed everyone what real partnership means." Shadow pressed his head against Michael's chest, their bond stronger than ever. Around them, Salem was healing, transforming, becoming what Thomas Harrison had dreamed it could be, a place where truth and justice prevailed, where loyalty meant more than power, and where the unlikeliest of heroes could change everything. As they resumed their patrol, Michael reflected on their journey. The wrongful conviction had nearly destroyed him, but it had also revealed the extraordinary depths of loyalty, courage, and love that could exist between a handler and their K9. Shadow hadn't just saved him from prison. He'd reminded everyone that true justice comes from the heart, guided by unwavering faith and unconditional love. Together they walked into the gathering dusk, partners in justice once more, their story a testament to the enduring power of trust, truth, and the unbreakable bond between human and dog.